What is going on, everybody? In today's video, we are breaking down my top 50 running backs for the 2025 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. We're currently putting out free fantasy football content every day so that you guys can prepare for the upcoming 2025 fantasy football season. If you're into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. Not waste any time, let's hop right into our top 50 fantasy football running backs for the upcoming season. All right, let's start with the first overall tier. That's going to be our GOAT first round tier. These are the players that you don't need to worry about whatsoever, that if they're on the board in the first round, we're taking them. We know who these guys are. These are the first three running backs going in every draft and every mock draft right now. Let's start with Bijan Robinson. He's my RB1 going into the 2025 fantasy football season, but this is very, very, very close. We're splitting hairs between these three guys. There's really no wrong answer here, but Bijan went from the RB9 in his rookie season to the RB3 in 2024, had over 1,400 rushing yards last year, 14 rushing touchdowns, and we're going to get a better overall offense this year with Michael Penix at the quarterback position, a more productive offense. At the end of the day, Bijan was the RB3 in fantasy points per game, and his advanced metrics are absolutely insane. Number 1 in weighted opportunities, number 4 in total snap share, number 4 in carries, number 4 in targets, number 3 in red zone targets, number 3 in rushing yards, number 3 in receptions, number 5 in receiving yards. We could go on and on. He had the 5th most routes ran last year. He had the most yards created out of any running back last year, number 4 in dominator rating amongst running backs last year, that tracked by Player Profiler. Listen, part of this is based on the fact that it's really difficult to repeat as the RB1 or the wide receiver 1 for that matter, but I'm just in on Bijan as my RB1. I think it presents the most overall upside. I'm expecting the most potential positive regression out of a top running back going into 2025 out of Bijan. So he's number 1 overall for me. We will leave it at that. I know there's a lot of people who agree with that, so not going to break any of these guys down too extensively. But next up, we've got Saquon Barkley, who was the RB2 last year in full PPR, 345 rushing attempts, a lot of rushing attempts, over 2,000 rushing yards, finishing just 5 yards over 2,000. Extremely good, right? 13 rushing touchdowns, all the productions there, 278 receiving yards, 33 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns. And if you guys go back to the offseason last year, I was very, very high on Saquon Barkley, continuously arguing for you guys to draft more Saquon Barkley and more aggressively, right? And he finished as the RB1 in fantasy points per game last year. And I don't think any of these numbers are going to change too drastically. We have to expect some regression here, though, right? 345 rushing attempts is a lot. He did it pretty cleanly last year. The offensive line play was great. Jalen Hurts, when what he brings to the table, helps a lot. Don't get me wrong. I won't be surprised if these numbers don't change, but I do think there's going to be some sort of regression here. Then there was still a lot of wear and tear on this team. Obviously played through the entirety of the entirety of the playoffs going into the Super Bowl as well. So listen, there's no knock here on Saquon Barkley whatsoever, but for me, he comes in number 2 overall here. But once again, we're splitting hairs. There's no wrong answer amongst these three guys. Then we got Jahmyr Gibbs, who finished as the RB1 in full PPR last year, 250 rushing attempts, 1,400 rushing yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, 63 targets, 52 catches, 517 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. Gibbs is in line for another monster season. And listen, he did finish as the RB2 in fantasy points per game and a very productive rookie season, RB10 in full PPR, RB8 in fantasy points per game his rookie season. And I think some people baking into the fact like David Montgomery is going to be back and all that, but Monty only missed 2 games, and essentially 2.5 games. Got hurt week 15, didn't play week 16, didn't play week 17. So really only missed 2.5 fantasy games. And Monty was on absolute fire last year. Monty was great last year before he got hurt. And obviously those really, really big games out of Gibbs came at the end of last season for the most part, in week 15, 16, and 17. And then in week 18, he had a monstrous game. But normal people don't play fantasy in week 18. Nonetheless, right? Listen, I'm just not worried about things here. I know for some people like Ben Johnson's gone, they might worry about Gibbs, but I don't think anyone's that worried. Gibbs has to be in the top 3. Undoubtedly deserves to be, and I'm not worried about Monty being back or not being back, Ben Johnson not being here or not being here. The run game is the heartbeat of this Lions offense at the end of the day, so Gibbs still makes it into the GOAT tier as we approach 2025. All right, let's move into the first tier overall. And surprise, we're actually going to go over 50 more running backs. We're not going to include the GOAT tier. We got the GOAT tier, 3 guys there, and 50 additional running backs, so buckle up. But everybody in this first tier here, I would be completely fine with them being my RB1s. These are the lower end true RB1s who could all go in the first round, and at worst will go in the very beginning of the second round in your fantasy draft. So completely okay coming out of any draft with these guys as my RB1, just a little bit of a lower end RB1 compared to the GOATs that you guys see on the screen. And you could very well argue that Derrick Henry should be in that first tier. And I don't know if I really have an argument for him to not be in it, outside of maybe he doesn't bring as much pass catching upside to the table as the other guys that you see in the first GOAT tier, right? But I don't know if he really needs to. Over 1,900 rushing yards last year, 325 rushing attempts, 16 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns. Was he running back 4 in fantasy points per game last year, and the running back 4 in full PPR overall last year? I mean, the other knock here is a lot of volume in the last 3 seasons, 280 or more rushing attempts in 3 straight seasons. And I mean, really since 2019, he's had 280 or more rushing attempts in every year except for 2021, where he got injured and he was well on his way to that number as well. Age 31, going into his 10th year. I don't know if any of it matters. I just really don't know if any of it matters. Derrick Henry, I'm still perfectly okay with and could undisputedly still be in that very top tier that you guys see. So no qualms whatsoever if he's my RB1. There's another player last offseason I was aggressively high on and we talked a lot about as well. Got a lot of heat for liking Barkley and Henry last year. And listen, there could be some regression here for both those guys, but they are still undoubtedly very solid players to draft. Next up, we've got Devon Achane, who finished as the RB5 in full PPR last year. And this is a player who I am seeing move up in ADP, finished as the RB6 in terms of fantasy points per game last year, 907 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, 87 targets, 78 catches, 592 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns. And I mean, this was a player who just had an immense amount of value last year outside of the fantasy championship, where he had 5.8 fantasy points and then a little stretch when Tua was hurt, right? But once Tua was back, week 7 after that week 6 bye week, right? Devon Achane had double-digit fantasy points in every game except for week 17, right? We know what it is here. The volume in the passing game is insane. You can get it done on the ground. Was fully healthy last year. Like, the injury concerns that you may have had for Devon Achane after his rookie season are gone. The upside's massive. He's the vocal point of this offense, in my opinion. And we have regression being shown from Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So Achane, immense amount of upside. Absolutely love him. And I may have him ranked a little bit higher than some people, but I absolutely love him at his current ADP. Next up, we've got Ashton Jeanty, rookie running back for the Raiders. And I like Ashton Jeanty as much as the next guy. I just think there's a little bit more stability baked into Derrick Henry, a little bit more upside baked into Devon Achane. And I have kind of talked in the offseason about a potential for Ashton Jeanty to have a rookie season similar to Bijan Robinson, where it's like he's kind of aggressively hyped up. And then Bijan still had a very good rookie season, but he didn't necessarily have a rookie season that met his ADP in mock drafts, finishing as the RB9. Very solid. You probably weren't disappointed, but plenty of people were disappointed because they drafted Bijan in the top 5, right? And Jeanty's going a little bit further back in mock, so I don't know if that's even a fair argument. And then some people reminded me, well, Bijan had a lot of touchdowns vultured in his rookie season by Arthur Smith being the offensive coordinator for, no reason whatsoever. So I don't know if that's fair. Geno Smith, fine at quarterback, good enough receiving options with Bowers, Jacoby Myers, maybe some Jack Besh in there as well. The run game should be much, much improved at Ashton Jeanty here. All the volume's going to Ashton Jeanty. We already know that. There's really no other running back here that's going to concern us in any way. One of the best running back prospects we've seen in some time, probably the best we've seen since Bijan Robinson, some would argue since Saquon Barkley. So listen, I'm not down on Ashton Jeanty. I just like Henry and Achane a little bit more, but I'm perfectly fine if Jeanty's my RB1 going into next year. Then we've got everyone's favorite, Christian McCaffrey, who I have seen starting to rise a lot in ADP. I mean, you're seeing a lot of mock drafts, which is very common now for CMC to go go in the first round, right? But we know what last year was: the injuries. Played in 4 games, 12 fantasy points per game. After being the RB2 or better in fantasy points per game 2 years in a row, averaging 21 or more fantasy points 2 years in a row. RB2 or better in full PPR 2 years in a row. We don't need to break this down extensively. You're either in the boat that the injuries concern you, you're out, or you're in the boat that the upside's crazy here, the floor is still fine, the injuries don't concern you. That's what it is. I am fine where C-Max being drafted. I find myself drafting the other names on the screen more than Christian McCaffrey, but I will take shots on Christian McCaffrey going into 2025, and I still think due to the nature of who Christian McCaffrey is and what we know he can bring to the table when he's healthy, he belongs in this tier. So let me know in the comments where you guys fall in terms of your Christian McCaffrey faith as we approach 2025. All right, moving along to tier 2, I am perfectly okay with any of these players being my RB1. They're a little bit lower end RB1s compared to the guys that we've already gone over, but I got no problem if I come out of my drafts with these guys as my RB1s. I still think they are all perfectly fine RB1s. You just have maybe a little bit slight more risk associated, maybe a little bit less upside. But seriously, I love all these guys, and I think all their ADPs are very good values as we approach the season. Josh Jacobs, the first in this list, finished as the RB6 last year in full PPR, and I don't feel like he's being treated as such. Over 1,300 rushing yards, 15 rushing touchdowns, 43 targets, 36 catches, 1 receiving touchdown. This was the focal point of the Packers offense last year, and a lot of people have argued, well, now the Packers may throw more this year. They got Matthew Golden at receiver. Fine, but I still think the volume is going to be absolutely massive for Josh Jacobs going into 2025. This was a player who saw an insane amount of volume last year and just is not being treated as such in mock drafts right now. And I am perfectly fine at his ADP. I think he's one of the best values right now in drafts. He was number 6 in carries last year, number 5 in red zone targets, number 6 in rushing yards, number 4 in total touchdowns, number 8 in fantasy points per games amongst running backs, and still had a lot of really good advanced metrics. Number 2 in total yards created last year amongst all running backs, number 2 in evaded tackles, number 12 in explosive ratings, number 11 in breakaway runs. I mean, this was a very, very good year for Josh Jacobs, and I still think he's the undisputed heartbeat of that offense, that Matt LaFleur system. So I love Jacobs right now. I've got him right at the top of this tier. I also really like Bucky Irving. I think this is a player who could see similar progression, to like a Bijan Robinson, where his rookie season, he was the RB13, and now I think could easily finish in the top 6, top 5 running backs in 2025, mainly because I really believe in this Buccaneers offense. I think they're going to be in the red zone a lot. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. They have a plethora of pass catchers. Baker Mayfield coming off an MVP caliber type season. And I do think Rachaad White will still be involved in this offense, but I just think that Bucky Irving is going to get the bulk of the carries and the volume like he did last year. And once he really, took off last year, he just did not look bad. Had that weird week 14 performance against Las Vegas where he only had 2.8 fantasy points. But you look between weeks 12 and week 17, he had 13.3 or more fantasy points in all of those games. And he had 18.2 or more in all of them except for 2, excluding week 14 against the Raiders. He had 23 or more fantasy points in 3 of those games as well. So listen, there's nothing to dislike about Bucky Irving. I think that the volume is going to remain the same. I think that they're going to be in the red zone a lot. I'm all in on Bucky Irving going into next year. Then we got Jonathan Taylor, kind of the tale of 2 stories last year. Was perfectly fine to start the season, double digits through the first 4 games of the season, then was hurt, missed 3 games, had some inconsistency, and then was the best running back through the fantasy playoffs, or close to the best running back possible. 10.1 fantasy points in week 15 wasn't anything crazy. Had that fumble that was a touchdown, that wasn't a touchdown, that he dropped, right? That obviously hurt a lot for the Colts and for Jonathan Taylor's fantasy rankings, but nonetheless, the following week, 39.8 fantasy points, 3 rushing touchdowns. The week after that, 27.6 fantasy points, 2 rushing touchdowns, was the RB12 last year in full PPR, over 1,400 rushing yards, 11 rushing touchdowns. Monster year for JT. Yeah, this offense concerns me. Danny Dimes, Anthony Richardson. What are we going to get here? But the volume in the run game is all Jonathan Taylor's to lose. He is the focal point of the run game here. And we know what he is. He's uber talented. Struggled 2022, 2023, missed some time last year. But listen, top 12 running back last year. We saw through the playoffs, reminded of what Jonathan Taylor can do. No reason to dislike him. Next up, we've got Chase Brown, a running back I've talked a lot about this offseason, who I'm really high on. Massive amount of volume in the passing game last year in an offense that throws the football a ton, that's going to throw the football a ton again this year with this defense not looking any better. You look at some of the advanced metrics last year for Chase Brown: number 6 in total targets, number 11 in red zone touches, number 13 in receiving yards, number 5 in receptions, number 12 in total touchdowns, number 15 in routes ran. But like many will point out, that was with Chase Brown splitting time with Zach Moss weeks 1 through 8, and then not becoming the true RB1 until week 9. And you look, weeks 9 through week 17 last year, double digits in every game, 19 or more fantasy points in all of those games except for 2. He's going to be the RB1, in my opinion, for the full season this year. Zach Moss will be back, still rehabbing that neck injury, though. I'm just not concerned about it. Chase Brown, think about what he can do with a full season as RB1 volume under his belt. Love Chase Brown, super high on him. Very, very good offense to be in for him. Going to have a monster season. Next up, we got my guy Kyren Williams, another player who I constantly am ranting about in the offseason, has been the RB7 2 years in a row in fantasy football. This is a red zone monster. Did drop from the RB2 in fantasy points per game to the RB10, but still had 16 total rushing touchdowns last year. Number 7 in rushing yards, number 4 in total touchdowns, number 10 in fantasy points per game, has a lot of good advanced metrics, and ultimately is just a player that gets the ball in the red zone a ton. Number 1 amongst all running backs in red zone touches last year with 77. I don't get the knock on Kyren Williams. I'm not worried about the fact that they drafted Jarquez Hunter. They drafted Blake Corum last year. Sean McVay has shown he will run a running back into the ground. I think that's exactly what he's going to do with Kyren Williams. I'm as high on Kyren Williams as anybody is. I think he's a steal at his ADP. I also think that Breece Hall is a massive steal at his ADP. I get the knocks here. I get that you drafted him in the early first round last year. He was the RB16. But if you look a little bit closer at Breece Hall last year, while it was a disappointing season, there was still a lot of positives to take away, believe it or not. He was still number 8 in snap share, number 15 in total opportunity share, and probably more importantly, number 3 in total targets last year, number 4 in receiving yards, number 4 in total receptions, number 3 in target share, and had the most routes ran, the highest route participation amongst all running backs last year. Justin Fields, notoriously known for dumping off the football, a new quarterback for the Jets. I think this is going to be very good for Breece Hall, who had 76 targets, 57 catches, 483 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns last year. And don't forget, a majority of Breece Hall's upside in 2023, when he was the RB2, came through the passing game. He was more efficient, better on the ground in 2023. We also had 95 targets, 76 catches, 591 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. So I am all in on Breece Hall at his current ADP. When he's dropping to the end of the 3rd round, sometimes the beginning of the 4th round, perfect RB2. If you're going wide receiver heavy to start your draft, great RB1 to grab with a lot of upside. And the last player in this tier is James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. This is another player, like, I don't really understand the James Cook hate. It's like some people worried he won't be back with the Bills. Some people worried there's going to be regression because he had 16 rushing touchdowns last year. Sure, then if there is regression, his ADP is fine. Like, He was the RB8 last year, the RB12 before. He should still easily be a top 15 running back, and I think he'll be back with the Bills. I just don't understand this one. I know the Bills' offense historically was like incredible last year and everything. So sure, there could be regression here, but he was the RB8 last year, like I said, in full PPR, the RB11 in fantasy points per game. I just think he's due for a solid year. He was number 2 in total touchdowns. Once again, a lot of people were just saying, well, there's going to be regression. There has to be. But 16 rushing touchdowns when Josh Allen ran for 12 rushing touchdowns. Ray Davis had 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 receiving touchdowns, and Ty Johnson had 1 rushing touchdown. Listen, I don't know. I just think that James Cook belongs in this tier, and he's another player similar to Breece Hall. When he's fallen to the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th round, you should be smashing the draft button. If you're looking for an RB2 in that range, or if you started your draft wide receiver heavy, these are 2 players, Breece Hall, James Cook, who I think you should be ecstatic about and who I am still fine with being a low-end RB1 going into 2025 for your fantasy football rosters. Let's move along to tier 3, which I would call RB2s who could be RB1s. There's a lot of guys that I like in this tier that I think have solid ADPs, but more risk associated with these guys, more maybe veteran-esque presence here. And overall, I would prefer them as RB2s, and in most cases, probably RB3s, but I still think these guys have the opportunity to be graded in a higher tier when things are all said and done. Let's start with Alvin Kamara, who just misses the 2nd tier for me, as does Kenneth Walker. I'll go ahead and say that as well. Alvin Kamara, another great season last year, the RB9 in full PPR, 950 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, 89 targets, 68 receptions, 543 rushing yards, 543 receiving yards, botching Kamara today, 2 receiving touchdowns. But one thing I do worry about is that it will be a different offensive system this year with Clint Kubiak now with Kenneth Walker, who we'll talk about in a moment here in terms of the offensive coordinator. So that worries me a little bit because that is what led Alvin Kamara, for the most part, to have such an intense receiving year. I mean, it's not that he hasn't done that in the past, but ultimately number 2 in receiving yards amongst running backs, number 2 in receptions, number 1 in targets, number 1 in target share, number 6 in routes ran, number 2 in route participation, and that also had him finish number 5 in fantasy points per game. So listen, Kamara was the RB3 in fantasy points per game in 2023 and the RB11. Like, he still has been uber productive, but the change in offensive coordinator worries me a little bit, but the offense as a whole worries me more than anything. Quarterback play, Tyler Shucks, Spencer Rattler, what are we going to get here? Chris Olave banged up last year, Rashid Shaheed banged up last year, all the tight ends are hurt. I just don't know. I really think Alvin Kamara is perfectly fine at his ADP. I think he could be in the 2nd tier that we just went over. There's just some slight concerns, not really about Kamara, but about the situation as a whole. Then we got Kenneth Walker, kind of the opposite situation, situation here, right? I'm really high on Kenneth Walker. I've talked a lot about him in some of the recent videos. And once again, he gets Clint Kubiak as an offensive coordinator, leaving the Saints, going to the Seahawks. And I think that'll drastically impact Kenneth Walker, who's coming off of his best receiving season as a running back with 53 targets, 46 catches, 299 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown through 11 games. And you think back to last year with Walker, it feels like it was a bad season, but he only had 2 single-digit fantasy performances all year long. He just only played in 11 total games, and Zach Charbonnet was a perfect RB2 here who could obviously fill the role of Kenneth Walker when Walker was hurt. So there are concerns baked into the fact that Kenneth Walker has historically, he's never played a full season. He's always missed some amount of time. And then last year he missed 11 games. But this is a run-first offense now that'll get a lot of volume to the running back position through the air. So I think there's a lot of reason to like Kenneth Walker. I'm pretty dang high on him. I like him in the range where he goes in mock drafts right now. There's just some concerns, not in the situation, but based on the player here and his ability to stay on the field. But I will say, out of this tier, Kamara and Walker, my two favorite players. Next up, we got Joe Mixon, who maybe this ranking's a little bit unfair, was on an absolute tear last year before getting hurt. But what worries me the most about Joe Mixon is he just fell off at the end of the season, like was hardly even involved. And I think the passing attack for the Texans will be better this year. The offensive line should be better. But like I said, outside of week 2 against Chicago where he got hurt, he had 23 or more fantasy points in every game he played in between weeks 1 and 8. And he also missed 3 games in that stretch as well. And then he had that huge game in week 11 against Dallas, really big game in week 13 against Jacksonville. And then, like I said, after the bye week in week 14, just completely fell off and then didn't look great in the playoffs either. So Mixon still had over 1,000 rushing yards last year, 11 rushing touchdowns, was the RB17 last year. I think he's perfectly fine where he goes in drafts. Nick Chubb added to this offense. It doesn't really concern me. Mixon was the RB9 in fantasy points per game last year. Once again, I think Mixon is fine. I think that's it for me. He's fine where he goes, and we will leave it at that. I kind of called this point in the tier just like the veterans, right? And then we got James Conner, like another veteran guy, RB11 last year. I mean, he's a guy who gets it done every single year. It seems like no matter what. And we always kind of look back and think, why did I rank James Conner so low? He's the RB15 in fantasy points per game last year. Over 1,000 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, 414 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. Played in 16 games last year. I think Trey Benson's a solid handcuff, but Trey Benson doesn't scare me enough that, unless there's an injury to James Conner, I think it's all Conner here. But there were some bumps in the roads, a little bit of inconsistency when you start to break down the performances last year, but ultimately very, very solid and was really good at the end of the season outside of week 17 against the Rams when you needed him the most. But, and I mean, he got hurt in that game, but nonetheless, right, Conner, solid. Could have another season like last year, or could have closer to a finish of RB 18, 20, 22. It's all over the place. And the other knock here is he's age 30 going into his 9th season. But once again, Conner's that guy who we always look back on. We're like, why did I not draft more of James Conner? So I won't be surprised. Then we got Chuba Hubbard of the Panthers, who I do like a lot, was the RB14 last year. Chuba Hubbard was a running back I talked about a lot last offseason as a sleeper. RB13 in fantasy points per game. Over 1,000 rushing yards, or over 1,100 rushing yards, just under 1,200 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, 171 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. And this offense did improve last year, which I actually think could hurt Chuba Hubbard because it improved as the year went on through the passing game. Bryce Young improved, right? And I think it could be good and it could be bad because I do think we could see more volume through the air to guys like Ted McMillan, even more out of guys like Xavier Leggett and Jalen Coker. I think Adam Thielen will still have a role. And the other thing is the Panthers went out and drafted Trevor Etienne, and they added Rico Dowdle. And I think a lot of people are overlooking the addition of Rico Dowdle here. So I think it's Chuba Hubbard's backfield, but I do think those other guys will get some sort of volume, where last year, in my opinion, there wasn't really any threat whatsoever to Chuba Hubbard. So I still like him a lot. I'm not drafting him aggressively at his ADP, but I still like him a lot. He's just kind of in this tier of he's fine where he's going. Not overly bullish on him at the end of the day, but perfectly fine. Next up, we got DeAndre Swift. Yes, DeAndre Swift is this high for me. Yes, I'm a fan of DeAndre Swift. I think he's one of the safest picks at his current ADP in fantasy drafts when it comes to the running back position. I've talked about Swift in every video recently, so I'm not going to break it down extensively, but has averaged over 12.5 fantasy points per game in 3 straight seasons. The floor is very safe, but I think the ceiling could be higher than ever. Drastically improved offensive line in this past free agency and in the past 2 seasons NFL drafts. Should get a better offensive system, undoubtedly, with Ben Johnson at head coach, an offensive system that led David Montgomery as well as Jahmyr Gibbs to combine for 32 rushing touchdowns last year alone. There's no competition in terms of running backs here. I'm not worried about any other running back on this roster. They didn't go out and spend high draft capital on a running back like a lot of people thought they would in this past NFL draft. I like Swift. His ADP is great. You could certainly argue against him here, but I think he's one of my favorite running backs to draft based on his ADP right now. When I'm drafting Swift, he's ending up as an RB3 for me a majority of the time. I think that is absolutely fantastic. A perfect bench running back for you guys, and a player who could be valuable in the flex as well. And at worst, the floor should be safe here. Once again, averaging 12.5 or more fantasy points in 3 straight seasons. So if the ceiling doesn't, come under Ben Johnson as a head coach, Caleb Williams in the sophomore season, better offensive line, all that stuff, then the floor is still safe. And just don't forget, there are a lot of touchdowns vultured away from DeAndre Swift for no reason last year as well. Next up, we got David Montgomery, and I do think you could argue Monty should be higher here. Monty is a player who I think is being really overlooked because the end of the season, really shined on Jahmyr Gibbs. All the recency biasy lies with Jahmyr Gibbs, and we could see, like, some people worry, like, Raheem Mostert for the Dolphins last year just completely falling off, and Devon Achane taking everything away, right? And where the previous season, Mostert and Achane were both very, very productive in that Dolphins offense. But I don't see that. Monty's going to have a tremendous amount of volume. He's the, heartbeat of this team at the end of the day. And he was on a great pace last year. When you break it down, he only had single-digit fantasy performances twice. Once in Week 7 against the Vikings, and then once in Week 15, the game he got hurt against the Bills. And you take Gibbs's numbers and line them up next to Monty. The only game that really impacted Monty was Week 7 against the Vikings. Outside of that, Monty was just behind Gibbs a couple spots for the entirety of the season. I'm not worried about the departure of Ben Johnson here. This is a player that will still get a lot of volume in this offense. So once again, Monty's a player at his ADP that I am drafting a lot of. I'm not worried about anything, not worried about the end of season injury. I'm good with Monty where he goes. Then we got Aaron Jones. This is another player, RB15 last year. Over 1,100 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, good involvement in the passing game, 62 targets, 51 catches, 408 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. I get it. Jordan Mason's here. Different offense this year. J.J. McCarthy's the quarterback, but I'm not really worried about anything here. I think he's fine. He played in 17 games last year. There's always this, Aaron Jones is old. He's going to get hurt. Now we got Jordan Mason in the mix, but you look back to last year, single-digit fantasy performances 3 times. That was it. There were a couple fumbles in there, 5 fumbles, 3 lost. That was concerning at times, but this is a great offensive system under Kevin O'Connell. What is there to worry about here? Maybe some red zone touches go to Jordan Mason, so that knocks Jones back a little bit, but ultimately, I'm completely fine with Aaron Jones where he goes in drafts. Of course, the age could be a factor here for some of you guys. Once again, Connor, Mixon, Jones, a lot of these guys in this tier, they're fine, and we'll leave it at that. Then we got Omarion Hampton, who's going to be ranked higher for some people out there, which is completely fine. Listen, with Omarion Hampton, I do think as the season goes on, the upside can just progress. The volume in the rushing game can progress here. I'm as high on Hampton as a prospect as the next guy. It's a good landing spot. Don't get me wrong. This is a system that will run the football a lot, but I also have the feeling that this system will throw the football more than people think because beginning of last year, Herbert went into the season hurt. They got hurt early again in the season. Then week 8-ish forward, they threw the football a lot more once Herbert was healthy. And then the other factor here is that I think people are overlooking Najee Harris. Najee Harris has been, no matter what you want to say, he's been the RB23 or better in 4 straight seasons in fantasy football, right? He's had over 1,000 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns or more in 4 straight seasons as well. The 4th of July incident thing, firework, injured eye, I get it, but I still think Najee is going to be a factor here. And this is a player, when you look at Najee Harris, who had double-digit fantasy performances every game except for 6 last year. So can still be productive, and I think we'll still get touches in this system. But I do certainly believe that the higher upside player is Omarion Hampton, and as the season progresses and down the stretch, Hampton will be the running back to own. So I like Hampton a lot, but I have a couple other players who I think will be a little bit more stable for majority of the season in front of him. But if you're higher on Hampton than some of the guys we just went over, I'm not going to knock it whatsoever. Then last but not least in this tier, we have Tony Pollard, another running back who I've talked a lot about in the offseason, who I think is a very solid running back who's being overlooked as another player. You look to last year, only had single-digit fantasy performances 6 times, then missed week 17. Every other game, double digits in a poor offense with poor quarterback play. The offense should be better this year. Was the RB21 last year in full PPR, over 1,000 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. Nothing crazy here. Once again, I think he's just fine. Lower end guy, prefer him as an RB3, and some builds fine as an RB2, but we prefer him on the bench, can use him as an RB3 and flex option. I just think he's being slightly overlooked. I'm not expecting anything crazy, but his ADP is very valuable right now, and I think he still belongs in the 3rd overall tier as we approach 2025. All right, let's move into the 4th tier overall. And basically, these are going to be running backs that I prefer on the bench still, but certainly have the potential to be viable RB2 and or flex options throughout the year. Just a lot more risk, even more risk associated than the last tier that we went over. But there are some names that I really like in this tier. Let's start with Isaiah Pacheco, who tough to get a read on based on what he did last year, began the year, on a good pace. 15.8 fantasy points in week 1, 16.1 in week 2, then was hurt and just didn't really get back and going ever, it felt like. Return in week 13, but week 13 through week 17, then through the playoffs and in the Super Bowl, just didn't feel the same, but I think he was just still dealing with injuries, and I think he'll be, back fully healthy and in a better place in 2024. I've been historically an Isaiah Pacheco truther, and very, very high on Isaiah Pacheco in the past, once again. But I like him. I'm just a little bit worried because the eye test was very worrisome last year. But once again, I think he'll be fully healthy, good to go, and could end up being a draft day steal for a lot of you guys. I also really like Brian Robinson as well. I think the knock on Brian Robinson is his ability to stay healthy. And Brian Robinson is a player who, traditionally starts out pretty dang solid first couple of weeks of the season. Certainly did last year. And then the inconsistencies start and some of the injuries start, and it just is concerning. But he's the RB1 in this offense. I still like this offense. Austin Eckler will get some volume through the air primarily. Like Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols had moments last year, but they didn't do a ton with those moments. So he's an RB1 on his team who just gets really overlooked right now. And I think the main knock is his ability to stay healthy. But heading into a contract season, could have a massive year, maybe not massive, but have a very good year, and could be a draft day steal. So I do find myself drafting a lot of Brian Robinson because of his current ADP. But there are some concerns there, and I don't know how high the upside is at the end of the day, especially when Jaden Daniels has the ability to run the football at the quarterback position. Then we kind of have a break in this tier for me where let's just talk about a couple rookies. Okay, who is your favorite rookie running back out of this tier? And I'm not saying that you have to view them in this tier personally, but let me know in the comments down below. We'll start with Caleb Johnson, who I think is my favorite. I think the situation is the best here, where this is an Arthur Smith system that traditionally does use the running back position, even if Jaylen Warren's going to get some volume here. I do think the first couple of weeks of the season could be a little bit disappointing for Caleb Johnson, but similar to Omarion Hampton, he could get the bulk of the volume as the season progresses. Listen, I don't know what to expect out of the Steelers offense this year, so I think the unknown kind of worries me. Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, DK Metcalf's wide receiver 1. Then we got Jonnu Smith, tight end, Pat Freiermuth. A lot of question marks at receiver. Once again, Jaylen Warren will get some volume here. But I think that Caleb Johnson, as the season progresses, due to the nature of an Arthur Smith system, could get a lot of volume here. So I'm fine with taking some shots on Caleb Johnson, undoubtedly. Then we got RJ Harvey, who is my favorite prospect out of this tier in terms of rookie running backs, and initially was my favorite until J.K. Dobbins got added to the Denver Broncos. And listen, there are some murmur of Audric Estime or Jaleel McLaughlin still getting touches here. And I think the other concerning thing here is that this is a pass-first offense. Maybe they do want to run the football more, and they should have the ability to this year with Harvey and Dobbins added to this roster. But once again, those are just my concerns, right? I like Harvey probably the most, arguably, initially coming out of NFL drafts due to this landing spot. Maybe not even as much of my favorite prospect here, but just the landing spot I like the best, right? And then Dobbins got added to the roster, which as soon as that happened, I've told you guys undoubtedly that I've had concerns here. So Harvey, good upside. I will say the benefit here is that Dobbins has a history of injuries. So Harvey's fine. Let me know if you guys like Harvey more or less than Johnson Henderson or Judkins. And in terms of Travion Henderson, I do think he's very close to Caleb Johnson here in terms of having the best overall volume, and also very close to Quinton Judkins. This tier of rookie running backs, I just am not finding myself drafting a lot of, because I think that there's a lot of unknown, but any of these guys could finish with enough volume to put them in top 15, top 12 consideration in terms of finishes at the end of the season. So it's just a weird tier for me, because like Caleb Johnson still has Warren there. RJ Harvey still now has Dobbins there. Henderson still has Ramondre Stevenson there. Quinton Judkins we'll get to in a minute. But Travion Henderson, I do like, and I do think is worth the selection as well. But once again, I don't know exactly what to expect out of this offense going into next year. I know a lot of people are like really high on it as a sleeper offense. I think that's fine. I like Henderson as a prospect. I do think Stevenson will still get some touches in this offense and some volume. But once again, as the season progresses, the upside lies with Travion Henderson. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. I think he's fine. Dynasty is a different story. But for this year, I don't exactly know where I'm at in terms of redraft. Then Quinton Judkins initially was my favorite out of this bunch. I think had the best opportunity for initial volume. I do like Dylan Sampson, the other rookie running back for the Browns, but now we have this domestic violence situation, off the field issue with Quinton Judkins. How is that going to impact things? For me personally, like I tell you guys every single time something like this happens, I don't think it's really going to impact anything for the upcoming fantasy season. It's just the way that the NFL and NFL teams deal with these situations. The legal process itself has to shake out, and that could take a long time. So for me, I don't think it's really going to impact Quinton Judkins going into 2025. So however you viewed him before this situation, I would probably view him the same exact way. And I wouldn't even, like, some people are worried, like, is he going to get a contract? He hasn't signed this. Like, it's the Browns. Do they have moral obligations? I don't think they have any team in the NFL that the Browns have any. So, I do like him, but now this situation, it just feels murky. It's one of these things that happens in fantasy. So I don't think there's a lot changing for me, but I do think that Dylan Sampson could become more of a factor here. And I still think that Jerome Ford could have some sort of role, I suppose. So that rookie running back break in that tier, it confuses me. I won't lie to you guys. Next up, we got Tyrone Tracy, who a lot of people are kicking Tyrone Tracy to the curb. The RB26 last year in full PPR. Obviously, didn't start the year as the RB1. That was Devin Singletary through the first 4 weeks of this season. Then we got a little start out of Tyrone Tracy in week 5, where he had 14 fantasy points. And then it was a bit bumpy, but he did have plenty of double-digit fantasy performances with very poor quarterback play. And this year, I would assume that Russell Wilson, Jackson Dart, Jameis Winston can deliver better quarterback play out of that misfit quarterback room that it is. And listen, I think that this is a pass-first offense with Malik Neighbors at the helm, but at the end of the day, they still need to run the football a lot. So I like Tyrone Tracy. I think he's actually a running back that I end up drafting as like an RB4, sometimes as an emergency RB3, depending on my build, and I think he could be a draft day steal. Is the ceiling high? I don't think so, but I'm fine with the floor that he offers, and we'll talk about Cam Scatterbo in a little bit. Next up, we got J.K. Dobbins, who, listen, like I see Dobbins go as early as the 8th or 9th round and as late as the 12th round in mocks right now. But I think come August time, J.K. Dobbins will be solidified in a higher ADP overall. Right now on Sleeper, his ADP is 134. I just don't think it's going to be there. This is the RB24 last year, who was on an absolute tear with the Chargers. There was some inconsistency, don't get me wrong, but there was plenty of high ceiling games for J.K. Dobbins last year. And, RJ Harvey's going to get some volume here, but I think that Dobbins is certainly going to get some volume here. It could be really frustrating for fantasy, but Dobbins is too talented of a player for me to put in a lower tier personally, especially coming off of the season last year. But what is the knock here? He's an injury-prone running back. 8 games 2022, 1 in 2023, 13 in 2024. So that's definitely factored in here. And I do think that will result in plenty of touches for Harvey. But I find myself drafting a lot of Dobbins. And I think he's a another player who could be a true draft day steal. Next up, we got Najee Harris. And I think Najee Harris is another draft day steal. We kind of touched on this when we talked about Hampton. I do think that Harris is going to get a lot of volume in this offense. And I was maybe more confident before the 4th of July eye injury, but all the reports are indicating that he's not going to miss training camp. He's not going to miss week 1. There's going to be no issue here. So once again, Najee Harris, plenty of production in the last couple of our first 4 seasons in the NFL. The floor is certainly here. It's Hampton's backfield to take, but this system, I think, while it could be more of a passing system this year, is traditionally a run-first system. So Harris, plenty of room for volume in this offense, and at worst is a very good handcuff. Next up, we got Rachaad White. You know I wasn't going to drop Rachaad White any lower than tier 4 if you guys have been following the channel for any amount of time. But listen, I'll say it over and over again. If you're out on Rachaad White, if you think the production is just going to completely fall off in 2025, if you think it already has fallen off, then at the end of the day, he's a fantastic handcuff running back, and I would say the best handcuff running back in all of fantasy right now, arguably, because we know what he can do in terms of standalone value if Bucky Irving were to go down. And then once again, you look to last year, Rachaad White was perfectly fine with an emerging Bucky Irving. He gave you single-digit fantasy performances 5 times, double digits every other time. The upside's lower, the ceiling's lower with Bucky Irving there, but this isn't offense that's going to be in the red zone a lot. There's going to be plenty of wealth to spread around. And at the end of the day, Rachaad White will still be involved in a contract season with the Buccaneers. Whether he's going to get re-signed by the Bucs or if they're going to let him go loose to another team, he is going to be putting everything out there on the field. And he was still a top 22 running back in fantasy football last year. Bad drop off from RB4 to RB22. And yes, Bucky Irving's a better running back here. I will fully admit that. But Rachaad White still has a role in this Buccaneers offense, and he is one of the best values at the running back position, in my opinion, in all of fantasy football right now. Let's move along to tier 5, and I would call this tier handcuffs and some veterans. And these should be the last running backs that you would consider drafting in your drafts. These are RB5s, RB4s, that I prefer as RB5s in builds. Sometimes maybe okay if it's just a handcuff as an RB4, but not much more than that. I don't know if that was a good description of a tier, but we'll talk about these guys. Travis Etienne, the first Jaguars running back to make the list today. This is the RB1 on the Jags right now, but we'll talk about Tank Bigsby and Bashal Tutin, the great conundrum of the Jaguars backfield, as I've called it all offseason long. Listen, Liam Cohen was able to use both Rachaad White and Bucky Irving to their strengths last year, and at times, or very, very short, limited amount of time, Sean Tucker. So, listen, I don't know if it's all doom and gloom for ETN here, who dropped from the RB3 to the RB35 last year, did not pass the eye test, was incredibly inefficient. But he could surprise. His ADP is very, very cheap. I'd probably wait to take a shot on Tank Bigsby or maybe even Bashal Tutin, but right now ETN's listed as the RB1. It is certainly his backfield to lose, and he could lose it. Doesn't look like a trade's going to happen. I don't really have anything else to say. I'm not really drafting ETN, but he makes the top of this tier. Next up, we got Javonte Williams. I'd rather draft Javonte Williams. I'll say that much. I do think Javonte Williams is being a little bit overlooked. I do certainly think that Jadon Blue could end up overtaking this backfield, but I think that Javonte will be a running back who will see more volume to start the season than I think some people are anticipating. Am I saying that's going to be like great or there's going to be high ceilings? No. But at the end of the day, this was a top 30 running back last year, and I think you could see similar numbers to what he saw last year. And this Dallas offense, I think, will be good through the air and have red zone opportunities. The Broncos were good through the air last year, though, and he only had 4 rushing touchdowns. So, yeah, like I'm not going out of my way to draft Javonte, but I think he's been slightly overlooked. I don't know. We'll move on. Next up, we got a lot of handcuffs in the next couple players here. Zach Charbonnet is probably my second favorite true handcuff in fantasy football right now. One of the elite handcuffs who has standalone value, whether Kenneth Walker is healthy or not. But if something happens to Walker, we'll step in and give you RB1 production right away. Finished as the RB25 last year. One of the best overall handcuffs. It's just going to be tough to call. Like, you're really only going to be confident in starting Zach Charbonnet if Walker is for sure out. But he can give you some value if Walker is not out. Once again, this is a run-first offense for the Seahawks. I'm drafting a lot of Zach Charbonnet because I do think he's one of the very high elite handcuff running backs as we approach the season. Then we got Jaylen Warren, who maybe is a little bit too low for some people's liking. Once again, this Arthur Smith offense is a run-first offense, but I mean, Jaylen Warren was just not productive last year. I don't know. Some people think Warren will get the bulk of the carries here, and he might to start the year, but I think Caleb Johnson will overtake it. I'm just not very in on Jaylen Warren. I don't have a lot to say about it. Fine in terms of like whether you view him or Johnson as a handcuff, but this is one of those situations where it's a split backfield, and I think he will end up losing a bulk of the touches. Next up, we got Tajay Spears, who I do really like. I think Tajay Spears, a really good handcuff. I just have an issue calling him more than a handcuff because he does have, the ability to miss a lot of time, right? Missed 5 games last year, went into his rookie season with a lot of concerns around his health and was able to technically play in all 17 games. And, the thing that makes me like Tajay Spears as a true handcuff is Pollard last year at the end of the year when he was hurt. Tajay Spears, weeks 15 through 17, was a true league winner. 27.2 fantasy points, 21.6, 13.3. So there's some upside baked in here. I think he's a really solid handcuff. And once again, this offense I think will be better this year. So I do find myself drafting Tajay Spears when I'm looking for my last running back in drafts right now. I think he's a solid handcuff, and I like him maybe a little bit more than some people. We'll leave it at that. Next up, we got Jordan Mason, another solid handcuff who was productive, to say the least, in place of CMC last year. And we saw plenty of double-digit fantasy performances out of Mason, at least through the first couple of weeks of the season. Was looking like a league winner, and then the production kind of fell off. Then he dealt with injuries, and then the production really fell off, and then dealt with more injuries at the very end of the season. So, listen, I like Jordan Mason. I do think he could get plenty of touches in this offense, but I still think it's Aaron Jones's backfield to lose, and I think that Jones can keep the backfield, but Jordan Mason will maybe have some sort of role here, and a lot of people anticipating a red zone role. So I like Jordan Mason. I think he's a very solid handcuff, but not necessarily my favorite. Then we got Cam Skattebo, and I do like Skattebo as much as the next guy. I think he's a fun player. I do kind of worry that, he didn't go until the 4th round of drafts, where like a lot of Skattebo truthers, had him graded higher. And I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of running back talent in this draft, so it's kind of tough to say, but once again, I still think this is 100% Tyrone Tracy's backfield. Skattebo could be a guy who comes in here, takes away volume, takes away some red zone looks for sure, could have a role in the red zone. And I do like him. I do think there's some upside here, but I do think that NFL execs did have some concerns here about like Skattebo being a true 3rd down back. Could have some nice passing upside here, pass catching upside, I should say. But then once again, how uber productive is this offense even going to be at the end of the day? So I like Skattebo. I know I'm lower on him, I think, than most people by looking at this ranking, but for me, he's still just a handcuff until proven otherwise, but he does have maybe a little bit more upside than some of the handcuffs we just went over. Then we got Ramondre Stevenson, kind of going back to the veteran-esqueness of this tier, and I do think Ramondre will end up disappointing some people in the sense that he could take some volume early on away from Travion Henderson, and I think he could be a guy who has some solid games, was a top 30 running back in fantasy last year, but I do think I could see him completely falling off as well. He did get a new contract from the Patriots for what it's worth, so although that was last year, so I guess it doesn't really mean much. Then we'd all like the fumbles last year, then he's benched, but he's not really benched stuff, and it's just frustrating. But now Mike Vrabel's system, it's a new change at coaching, and maybe they prefer Henderson over Stevenson. He's just kind of the veteran who's here. So weird situation. I don't love him, but don't be surprised if there are some decently productive games out of him this year. Then we got Tank Bigsby, who I think is a really interesting running back who was actually very efficient last year, 4.56 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns. Some of his advanced metrics are pretty good, was the RB36 in PPR last year. And I think that Tank Bigsby is the Jacksonville Jaguars running back right now at this point in the offseason, and I will admit this has fluctuated throughout the offseason, that I'm taking the most shots on. It could be Bashal Tutin, who we'll talk about soon, who takes over this backfield, but I think that Bigsby has the best opportunity to have the most consistent role through the entirety of the season. So I like Tank Bigsby as a late round flyer. Handcuff, you could consider him, but also has some standalone value in a Liam Cohen system that plays to the strengths, I should say, of different running backs. So I do like him, but that Jacksonville Jaguars backfield is a big question mark. Then we got Austin Eckler, age 30, going into his 9th season, who had 366 receiving yards, 41 targets, 35 catches last year, 4 rushing touchdowns. Gave you some good production in full PPR. Had double digits in every game he played in between weeks 1 and 12, except for 2 games, and then he got hurt and then didn't play again until week 18, so did nothing else for the fantasy season. So missed 1 game, single digits in 2 games, every other game double digits last year. Excuse me, he had 3 single-digit games, missed 1 game, double digits every other game. Sorry, kind of botched that. But yeah, I mean, I think this role will be entirely there for Austin Eckler this year. So low ceiling, but pretty safe floor. The concern here is, although he was able to play in week 18 and return for the playoffs for the Commanders, he's still coming off of an injury year, and he's older. And I don't know. I think that's enough to say, right? I mean, this is a player who went from the RB2 in fantasy to the RB1 to the RB26 to the RB34. So tough read here, but I do think he'll be used within the system. I just don't think there's a super high ceiling. And I do think I find myself drafting quite a bit of Austin Eckler because his ADP is very cheap, at least in full PPR settings. I'll take shots on him. Then to wrap up this year, we got 2 handcuffs that I really like. I like Ray Davis a lot. I don't know if the standalone value is crazy here, but we did see when James Cook missed time last year, we looked to week 6, we got 18.2 fantasy points out of Ray Davis. So we do know if James Cook is to miss time, assuming that James Cook is back with the Bills, that Ray Davis is a fantastic handcuff option who has some standalone value. It's just really hard to call. Like week 7, 11.7 points, then 2.9 points, 17 points. 0.6 points, 1.1 points, bye week, 13.7 points, 0 points, 10.9. So only going to have the confidence if he is lining up as the RB1 and James Cook is out for the week. And I will say, if you think James Cook is going to be traded or not back with the Bills, right, then start drafting Ray Davis because he is right now going to be the RB1 if James Cook is not there. But I do think Cook will be back, so I'll leave it at that. But right now, Ray Davis has a very late ADP on Sleeper. His ADP is 148.1. Then we got Tyler Algier. This is another running back, like pure handcuff for me, but very, very solid handcuff because we know exactly what to expect if Bijan Robinson is to miss time. We know that Tyler Algier can come in and act as an RB1. And similar to Ray Davis, you're not going to be able to call when he has standalone value, but he does have some standalone value. We saw some double-digit performances out of him last year, albeit against very poor run defenses for the most part. So Algier, very solid handcuff if Bijan Robinson is to miss any time in 2025. Last but not least, let's go through tier 6 very quickly. I'll just call this everybody else. Lowest end handcuff running backs available, essentially. We got Rico Dowdle, who I do think is worth some draft selections for you guys as late round flyers, maybe in best ball drafts as well. I think he's a really good handcuff because this was the RB23 last year. If something is to happen to Chuba Hubbard, this is a running back who finished with over 1,000 rushing yards last year. Just 2 rushing touchdowns, but 3 receiving touchdowns as well. And once again, top 25 running back last year, albeit he was the RB1 for Dallas. So I like him a lot as a handcuff, but I think it's Chuba's backfield until further notice, but I think we could also be surprised and maybe see some standalone value out of Rico Dowdle. So I think he's been a little bit overlooked. He could even maybe be in contention for the 5th tier. I do like him quite a bit. Then we got Isaac Garando, who this is a popular handcuff to draft because of the health history of Christian McCaffrey and the fact last season when Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason were both injured, Garando had 26.8 fantasy points, 11.5 fantasy points, then missed a game because that's what Niners running backs do. Then had 13.9 fantasy points. So he's another running back who could definitely be in a higher tier here. Those are my 2 favorite running backs in terms of handcuffs in this tier for sure. And I think for good reason, we're seeing a lot of Isaac Garando being drafted. Then we got Trey Benson, who I think is fine as a handcuff. He's always or since his rookie season, the Trey Benson's going to take over James Connors any day now. And we kind of heard that narrative all last season, and then it just didn't happen. Benson was productive in weeks 9 and 10. And then right before the week 11 bye week for the Cardinals, I remember there was a lot of buzz about Trey Benson starting to take over the backfield. And then it just did not happen. He did not have more than 2.9 fantasy points in a single game after that last year. So I like Benson. I really liked him coming out of Florida State. It just hasn't been the correct landing spot yet, but it is his backfield, I would argue. I mean, you got Mario DeMarcado, Michael Carter, and DJ Dallas here who have had some moments too in their careers, but I think it will be Trey Benson if something happens to Connor. So very solid handcuff, but I don't consider him anything else other than a handcuff. Then we got Bashaw Tutin, the last Jaguars running back to talk about here. Profile is very similar to Bucky Irving. He's worth taking some shots on because of that Liam Cohen system. Once again, it will play to the strengths of the running backs. It's just such a big conundrum. I just don't know if it's worth risking right now. But once again, the draft capital for Etienne, Bigsby, and Tutin is very late, very low draft capital. So take some shots on all the Jacksonville Jaguars running backs if you want to. Bashaw Tutin, I do like, but I just don't know what we're going to be able to expect out of this Liam Cohen system. Earlier in the offseason, I was much higher on Bashaw Tutin, and it's just kind of gone back and forth. The great conundrum of the offseason, the Jaguars running backs and fantasy. Then we got another Cowboys running back in Jadon Blue, who a lot of people really like. I do see him drafted in a lot of redraft mocks right now. A lot of people anticipating he will take over this backfield for the Cowboys, and he certainly could, but I still am putting my money on Javonte Williams right now. Call me crazy. I don't know. We're going to have to see it. For me, I'd rather fight on the waivers for Jadon Blue. And, solid prospect, don't get me wrong. Some people, look at this backfield, and they also like Phil Maffa. Miles Sanders is here. It's not great. It's not great by any stretch, but I think this could be a really boring running back room at the end of the day for the Cowboys, who will be a pass first team. So Jadon Blue's fine. If you're in on him, you're not spending a lot of draft capital, but I'll fight for waivers on him if I have to. Then we got Nick Chubb. Don't forget about Nick Chubb. He is alive and still plays football, right? Only played in 8 games last year, and his return was fine. He scored a touchdown against the Bengals and then had a good game in the snow against Pittsburgh, and Week 13 was okay against Denver, but yeah, I don't know. The Browns' offense was basically only throwing the football at this point in the season last year and wasn't even that great in terms of their run game, obviously, but I don't know. I listen, I hope Nick Chubb absolutely balls out this year. Do not get me wrong. But I think he's worth, especially in best ball, taking some shots on. And he could have a role in the system, but I think he's a depth piece for a team that is trying as aggressively to contend as aggressively as possible. I still think it's Joe Mixon's backfield. But Joe Mixon goes at the very end of your fantasy drafts right now. You want to take a shot on him, see what happens. Sure, I think he could have a role, primarily a red zone role, but we talked about this when Nick Chubb initially signed with the Texans. For me, it's a depth piece and nothing more. Very low risk, high reward move for the Texans, and I do hope and wish the best for Nick Chubb as he continues to recover and continue to play football in the NFL, and I hope he absolutely balls out, but I just don't know if it's truly going to be there from a fantasy standpoint. Then, last but not least, Justice Hill. I don't see any talk about Justice Hill when handcuff running backs come up. He's my final running back that we'll talk about, RB53, technically on today's list. And I think he is one of these sneakier handcuffs that you guys can take some shots on, especially in deeper formats, especially in best ball formats, because he does have standalone value. Once again, impossible to call when Justice Hill is going to have those games where he does catch, a receiving touchdown or get 6 targets, 8 targets, whatever it may be, and, breakaway in the receiving game. We know it's Derrick Henry's backfield at the end of the day. But once again, if something, God forbid, happens to Derrick Henry, then Justice Hill will get the bulk of the carries and the involvement in terms of the running back position, in my opinion. So I think he's a really strong handcuff who does present some standalone value that's impossible to call, but he had 51 targets last year, 42 catches, 383 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. So there is some standalone value. You just won't be able to call when it happens, but he is a very, very solid handcuff in a run-first system for the Baltimore Ravens. And I think he should be talked about a little bit more as a handcuff option as we approach the 2025 fantasy football season. To do it for today's video. They're my top 50, technically top 53 running backs as we approach the 2025 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. And we're putting out free fantasy football content every single day to help you guys prepare for the upcoming 2025 fantasy football season. So if you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way out. If you guys want to check out any of our videos to help you guys prepare for the upcoming season, you can check them out on these playlists that'll pop up somewhere on the screen any moment now. If you guys have any fantasy football questions, redraft, dynasty, or best ball, be sure to drop them in the comments down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.